Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and in today's video we're going to be looking at the Docker init command. Just yesterday Docker put in general availability, or GA, the Docker init command, which helps us quickly create Docker files and Docker compose files for multiple languages and stacks that we'll see in a couple of moments, and really improves our workflow. So if you're ready, let's dig in. So I'm here in the Docker documentation page, and I'm looking at the Docker init command. And you'll see that it produces a few different files: Docker ignore, Docker file, a compose file, and some README. So this command helps us create some scaffolded files for our project. So if you're writing a Go app, you can use this Java, Node.js, PHP, Rust, and something else. So let's quickly look at what this command produces and see if we can incorporate it in our project. If you remember from my video somewhere in my channel, we created a Nest.js template for 2024 that is production ready. And so I'm really curious to see how close we are to what Docker recommends as a good production ready Docker file. So what we're going to do in this video is create like the template that Docker init creates for us, and then compare and contrast that with what we created some time ago, and then incorporate the changes if there's something missing. So let's look at the Docker init command specifically before we jump into incorporating those changes. I'm going to create a directory called Docker init. MD on Mac is short for make directory, and we'll cd into that directory. You'll see that it's empty, and so I'm just going to say Docker init, and it's going to ask me a bunch of questions like we saw in the documentation. It's asking me what application or platform I want to use. I typically use Node.js, but if you like Go, you can go ahead and choose that. Use the arrow keys to go up and down. I'm going to choose Node. You can see we have Rust, ASP.NET, which is great. Other just general purpose starting point. I don't know what that looks like, but I'm not going to find out today, but we can find out in another video or check it out by yourselves. But what we're going to do is create a Node.js project, and yes, I am using Node 2011. As you know, if you've been following my channel, I like Yarn more than NPM. And all right, so what command do you want to use to start the app? I'm going to say start. Well, mostly because it's going to produce a Docker file that's meant for production. We don't want something like start:dev, which we use in Nest.js, rather we want start, so let's use that. What port does your server listen on? Typically port 3000, so I'm just going to enter that here. And awesome, so it's actually gone ahead and scaffolded this. So let's open this up in VS Code and see what it produced. The first file here you see on the right hand side is a Docker ignore file, which is very interesting. I see a lot of things here that are not really specific to Node.js. Like class path typically is used in JVM languages like Java. It's ignoring itself, which is good. .env is good, we saw that in the other video. Git ignore, project settings. So I'm going to leave some of this here, except I'm going to remove class path because I don't care about it. Project is potentially some IDE settings, tools target. These all look like IDE stuff. We don't want Docker compose either. I think I forgot these in my previous video, so that's good to know. Node modules, npm. So that's a pretty good list. Best practices baked in right from the Docker team. That's nice. We'll come back to the compose file in just a second. I'm really curious to know what the Docker file is. So if we look at this, and I'll close my sidebar here for a second. There's some comments here. Comments are provided throughout this file to help you get started. If you need help, visit the Docker for reference. Awesome. Great, we're using that version. That's where the input comes in. So they are using Alpine, which kind of deviates from what I was using, which is good. I mean, like I said in the other video, if you're curious as to my opinions of why we don't use Alpine in a Docker file, go check out that other video. It'll be linked somewhere in this, somewhere on top or in the comments below. Env is production, which is what we did as well. They're changing and using a work directory. That is good. That's pretty standard practice. This is interesting. They download dependency as a separate step. Yeah, this is something that I noted again that I should do as an improvement to the Docker file. It's nice that it's here. So they're leveraging a cache mount so that Yarn speeds up its subsequent builds. Nice, good win. Leverage bind bounds package.json to avoid having to copy them into this layer again. So what this means is say you have a Node.js application, and within your, like on your laptop, you have package.json and yarn.log, because we used yarn, so it's using that here. Docker builds images in layers. So think of it like a multi-layered cake. And as it builds these images, it actually puts kind of each step into its own little layer. And what it does is, if a layer has not changed, it caches it, and it increases the speed of your build the next time you want to build it. So say you have package.json, yarn.lock, and your source files. Typically, if you don't have too many packages being removed or uninstalled and installed in your project, your package.json is not going to change, and neither is your yarn.lock. So Docker, when you build the image, let's say you only worked on an API or some feature in your company, when you rebuild this image, then it doesn't really have to rebuild the steps of copying all of this over. It can just cache them and then reference them. So that's kind of what they're doing here. It's a nice little trick to get some performance wins from building a Docker file. And then finally, you can see that it's doing a yarn install with production and frozen log file. Again, if you don't have any deletions or additions to your project, if you don't have any dependencies, then you don't have to reinstall everything, which is super fast. You will see that as you use this kind of setup in your own projects. Finally, setting user node, because we don't want elevated permissions within the Docker. This is more of a security step. And after doing all of that stuff, they are copying in your project directories, which is your source and all that stuff, exposing port 3000 and just saying start. Well, this wouldn't work in terms of a Nest project, because Nest.js builds its stuff, all of that stuff. But this is good to know. This is a great template to start off from. So that's the Docker file. Let's now look at the compose file. Again, comments are provided throughout this file to help you get started. So if you need more help, check out the reference file. So let's see what they have. What we really care about is the services block. And it says, this is my server, build context is dot, which basically says go ahead and build the Docker file, which is good. It's setting the node env to production. I think that was set as an arg, if I remember correctly. No, but it does take an environment variable, that's good. And it's exposing those ports. We mentioned 3000, so set that here. This is a nice little section here. This section below is an example of how to define a PostgreSQL database that your application to use. Depends on, tells Docker Compose if you're not familiar. Depends on, like, is this hierarchy which says, hey Docker Compose, before you start these sets of services, start these first and then the other one. So here you can say, if the DB depends on the fact that it has to be healthy and available for connections, and if you're going to say my server depends on a DB, then it's going to go ahead and start the DB first, make sure it's in a healthy state, and then it's going to start your server itself, therefore making sure your application boots correctly. And there's a little template here to start a PostgreSQL database with the stuff. Again, I've covered this stuff in my other video, kind of in depth with a little more explanation, so go check that out. And there's some volume mounts here, which again we've done in our previous video. So this looks good. I'm happy to say that a lot of this stuff is similar to what we already built kind of by hand, so we are following best practices. But what I'd like to see is to compare what this is with what we built. And so to do that, what I'm going to do is cd into the Nest.js 2024 template, and then open that up in VS Code. Cool. Now that we have that here, what I'm going to do is copy over the contents of this Docker file, so I have something to compare it to, and create a Scratch file. What I like to do is use this little application in VS Code. It's called Scratchpad, and I can say Scratchpad. You know how you have these little notes that you want to create, like quick little tips, but you don't want it to be part of your project, and you don't want to like switch to another note-taking app. These are super useful. So I will create a new Scratchpad, which will be, let's just call it a text file. It doesn't really matter. And we'll open up. We'll open up the Docker file that we created from the project here, so we have something to compare it to. I'll close out the sidebar so we have a little more space. All right, so here we have a little trick here on top, which if you see that video, you'll know why we added this in. We also have Teeny, which I think is a good starting point. I think that's one thing that's kind of missing here. We need this as an init container, so that process handling is done correctly. We see here env node, we have that as well. Env node is production. Here they're using Alpine by using args, build args with 2011, which is quite nice. But I'd like to pin these down and be super explicit about the versions that we're using. If you can imagine, we don't want to do something like Docker build and then say, what is that argument? Node version. So I think it's something like arg node version is something else. I'd much rather come here and actually control this so that we have controlled environments for staging, development, and production. Change user copied. I think this is one thing that we can improve on. So once we've kind of changed the directory, we want to use caching in our steps. So before we copy things over, I'm going to run this little performance trick that they've used here that copies over package.json, target package.json, all that stuff. So we get a little bit of a performance bump. They just say user node here, which I think I have done as well. So that's here. They have copied it. So you want to run the application as a non-root user, which is what we do just before like the actual command is run. So I think we're good there. We're also exposing code 3000. And let's see, they're also doing yarn install where that's part of this step, which means we could remove that here because we're making use of caching at this point. Even the installation of Nest CLI can kind of happen before so that we cache that step as well. And then the only thing that's left to do is build the project. So once you've copied over the source code and stuff that actually changes more frequently, we can do a yarn build. Expose 3000, user is node, and then this. So yeah, that's I think pretty good. We got a pretty good win. I'm going to go ahead and commit this. So let's say git status, and we'll add. Yeah, that looks about correct. Good. Let's just commit this, and let's say improve Dockerfile based on best practices. And let's git push. Cool guys, that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it. So in summary, we looked at the docker init command, which can fast forward your workflow. Even if you're not using the Nest.js template, you can use this to get things up and running. Earlier, you kind of had to either copy paste this from like previous projects or redo the whole thing, which is a pain. So it's a big win. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and please do click that like button and share if you think this is interesting. For sure, subscribe. It really helps me kind of get discovered by other folks like yourselves. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.